Welcome to OState Daily. Casey Porter here. So glad that you decided to tune in. Fans, we have a very, very, very special guest joining OState Daily today, Pastor Paul Blair. Yes, the Paul Blair, the one that you remember. That was just a tremendous lineman in the early to mid-'80s, who also was a tremendous lineman in the NFL for many years. That Paul Blair is joining OState Daily today. So, Paul, I'm so honored. I'm a little bit nervous. I'm not going to lie. I mean, you're like one of my childhood heroes, but I'm very excited. So thank you for joining.
Well, Casey, it is my pleasure, and it's an honor to be on with you today. So thank you for the invitation.
Okay, really cool. You grew up in Edmond. Of course, back then, Edmond was not like Edmond is now. I mean, it was smaller. I mean, you didn't have all the roads and stuff, so it was way different. But you grew up with Bill Self. You grew up with Jay Davis. And so that was just a great time. Of course, there was one Edmond school back then. That was a great time to grow up in Edmond, wasn't it?
Oh, well, I have many fond memories. Of course, I was born there in 1963, and when I was born, there was only 6,000 people in Edmond. By the time I was in high school, I think our population was up around 30,000. Of course, now it's just continued to explode and kind of been absorbed as a suburb of Oklahoma City, where you don't ever lose city. You know, you drive from Edmond right into Oklahoma City. But great memories. Of course, Bill Self, actually, Bill moved to Edmond when I was in the 4th grade. And we both attended Orvis Reisner Elementary. So my first memory of Bill Self was 3rd and 4th grade. We both had a crush on the same girl, Lori Buchhofster, and we'll make her
famous. I bet he won.
Yeah, and somehow or other, he got the girl. You know, I don't know. Just you not understand that football takes priority in the state of Oklahoma over basketball. But Bill was a good friend. We obviously played front yard basketball all the time. We get out in the driveway at either our house on Rankin Street in Edmond or go over to Smiling Hills where he lived, and we'd play horse. We'd play games. 3-on-3, 2-on-2, but it was a great memory playing many games of basketball with the legendary Bill Self. As a matter of fact, Bill probably made Coach De La Garza the legend that he wound up becoming. Coach D came to Edmond in the late 70s, 78, 79, and great coach. But when you have a young man with the talent that Bill Self has, that happens to be in your school district, that makes you a better coach quickly. And we were always in the playoff every year. And I can remember road trips with the other high school cohorts, going to cheer on our Bulldogs as we were enjoying those high school days. But Bill was a great friend going all the way back to to Orvis Reisner Elementary. So fond memory. And now he's making the big bucks as the head coach. We need to lure him back to Oklahoma State one of these days.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Okay, so you're a pastor now. You grew up in a very Christian household, and so obviously that was very natural to you. So kind of take us through how you transitioned into your life after football and became a pastor.
Well, Casey, it wasn't an immediate deal. I grew up, my dad was bivocational pastor, so he made his living as an architect, but served the Lord pastoring small churches. And I grew up in a great home, wonderful parents, came to know the Lord when I was a youngster, but really grew up in somewhat of a sheltered home. And sadly, as so many Christian kids do in growing up in America, when you get away to college, you make some bad decisions. And when I got away to Oklahoma State, like I said, I'd been very sheltered. So for about 5 years in college and my first 3 years in the NFL, I called myself a Christian, but there was really very little evidence. And then after my 3rd year with the Bears, I wound up, I was attending church on a Sunday evening out of respect for my dad in the off season. Really didn't want to be there. But I just asked myself the question, Paul, if is there really enough evidence? Is there really any evidence that would convince someone that you are a follower of Jesus? And I recognized at the time that, no, there really wasn't. So, whether I rededicated my life or truly was saved there at the age of 26, I got things right with the Lord and got married about a year or so later and, served the Lord, raised my family the right way, have had a wonderful wife. My beloved just had a birthday yesterday. We've been married for over 35 years. We've got two great sons, both professional men. One's a lawyer, one's a chiropractor. Both married, got grandchildren. So I actually was raising a family for about maybe 10 years before the Lord called me into ministry, and it was a situation that. I don't believe that pastoring is a job or a career choice. I believe it's a God calling. And I love the Lord, but never wanted to be a pastor. I'd seen what the work entailed. I'd seen what my dad went through. And it's not an easy job. And quite frankly, some of the stresses of dealing with the people within the congregation or add to the stress. But there was no doubt that I was called to become a preacher. So I've now been a pastor for about 25 years. And like I said, it was not an immediate. I retired from football, had my own business in Oklahoma City with my oldest brother.
Yep.
And actually was bivocational for a number of years. When I was called into ministry, we didn't just sell our business. I had to reallocate my time. But it was probably maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago that we actually sold our business. But I've been pastoring now for 25 years. I'm in Orlando right now. We have a congregation. It's part of our church in Orlando. So I travel back and forth. I'm 2 weeks live in Oklahoma City and 2 weeks live in Orlando. And on weeks that I'm not there, we simulcast or live stream to the other congregations. So we've got some good work going on and honored to do it. And that's the story. So it wasn't an immediate, it wasn't a lifetime goal, but it was a calling. And when safest place to be, as my wife said at the time, is right in the middle of God's will. So if the Lord was calling into ministry, then the only answer was to say yes, which we did.
You mentioned your older brother. You mentioned the business that you guys sold. I believe you guys actually did all the vending for Guthrie. I've been at Guthrie for 29 years. Was the head baseball coach there for several years. Worked under John Chappell. I know you know John. For many, many different years. I was his assistant coach. So you guys actually did the vending there at Guthrie for a while. That's cool.
We had a pretty successful little family business. We did vending, Votex universities. We went out as far as OBU and St. Gregory's, and we did the vending at Midwest City and Guthrie and Edmond and more, and I even reached up into Stillwater at one point in time. So yeah, that was back in the days where kids were allowed to buy Snickers bars and drink a Coke at school. And trust me, you get a kid with a couple of dollars in his pocket at school, he's going to put it in the vending machine. So it worked out well for that period of time.
It's kind of interesting, Edmond, is because it's like right in the middle of Norman and Stillwater. And that time when you were coming out of high school, OU had it just absolutely rolling. I know Jimmy Johnson had come to OSU, so he had created some excitement. But, I mean, pretty much you had to grow up an OSU fan to want to go to OSU at that time. You were always a fan of Oklahoma State, so that's probably why you chose OSU. But talk about that process of choosing to be a Cowboy in your time there.
Well, my parents actually grew up in Arkansas, and of course I'm an older guy now. But my parents were products of the Great Depression. My dad served in World War II in the United States Navy, and after the war was over, Mom and Dad met. They got married, and Dad moved to Okmulgee, and Dad started attending Oklahoma A&M at Okmulgee. They had a branch there at the time, and so my dad graduated from what became Oklahoma State. So naturally, our whole household grew up being Oklahoma State fans. And, I've got pictures of myself at the old Lewis Field back in, 67 with Pistol Pete down on the sidelines. So I've got great memories there. Quite frankly, I was a late bloomer, to be honest with you, Casey. I was not a prodigy. I was a pretty good football player as a little league kid up through junior high, but then I was kind of when teenagers hit that growth spurt, sometimes you're a little awkward, and there's a few years that can be just downright uncomfortable. And I was not the most stellar athlete from about 9th grade through 11th grade. So really, I only started 1 year for the Bulldogs. That was my senior year.
Oh, wow.
And I was a late bloomer. I grew a lot. I literally, went from like 5'10" to 6'1" between my sophomore and junior year, and then went from 6'1" to 6'3" between my junior and senior year. And I wound up being on the radar of colleges. And, I really really didn't think much about it. I was just naive. I was just trying to get after practice and go to school. I really didn't put that much thought in it. But then, I got invitations and went on some recruiting trips and, was training. And of course, when you're 18 years old, as a young man, your body goes through some pretty significant changes. And my oldest brother was heavy into weightlifting, and we just worked out like crazy. And I wound up going from, I think my senior year in high school, I was 220 pounds. And when I reported, I was 6'3", 220 as a senior. And when I reported first day of camp at Oklahoma State, I was 6'5", 255. So wow. I hit a growth spurt, and I wound up being really probably Oklahoma State's premier recruit that year. When during the signing process, I was just like an afterthought, and we signed Paul Blair from Edmond, and honestly, the year before, Rusty Hilger wound up being a gold nugget that they just stumbled upon. Rusty was given a scholarship to Oklahoma State after someone else had backed out, so they had one open. They gave it to Rusty. Of course, he went on, played about 8 or 9 years in the NFL, and the same thing with me. They were trying to get me to walk on, and I wanted to go to Oklahoma State, but I was going to go to Tulsa and take a scholarship before I walked on at OSU. And then about 3 days before National Signing Day, they had somebody back out of a commitment. They offered me the scholarship, and I took it as quickly as I could, and so wound up signing with Oklahoma State proudly, and the rest was history. I showed up at freshman camp, and I wound up being the talk of the camp, and made the varsity as a true freshman. So, with me, the big question was whether Oklahoma State was going to offer or not. But, that was where my heart was. Loved OSU, and I wanted to play there, but it just depended on whether they wanted me to play there. And fortunately, they wound up seeing the light and giving me an invitation. Jimmy first got there, I think in '78. He had a really good year his first year. It was kind of surprised everybody. They went 7-4, but didn't get a bowl invite. Then '80 was a little rocky. That was back when Jim Traber was playing for him, and I was a freshman in ’81. And again, we had a bowl year. We went to the Independence Bowl and lost to Texas A&M. My junior year, my second year there, I wound up injuring my knee and got a hardship ruling. So initially I made the varsity, but then injured my knee and wound up getting an extra season. But, 1982, we were supposed to be really good. Of course, that was Ernest Anderson's big year, and we had a veteran team, but we just couldn't put the wins together. We wound up going 4-5-2, which was a disappointment. And then we come back in '83, which ultimately wound up being Jimmy's last season. And I just saw Leslie O'Neal about 2 weeks ago. I was able to participate with him in his induction in the Ring of Honor. And of course, Leslie was a teammate and a great individual, great human being, and a phenomenal football player. But as we were talking, there was a whole bunch of us that nobody really knew how good we were. And we didn't know how good we were. All we'd done is, practice against each other. But that '83 team, we had about 9 or 10 guys that wound up spending some time in the National Football League. So, we show up in '83 and nobody really knew what to expect. Leslie O'Neal was about a 220-pound starting defensive end. Playing against these giant offensive tackles from Nebraska and Missouri. I'm a 250-pound offensive tackle. We were all sophomores. Hilger was there, and we wound up being a pretty good team. We wound up going 8-4. We beat Baylor in the Bluebonnet Bowl, and we lost 4 games by a total of 12 points. We lost by 6 points to Missouri in a snowstorm, and that was our biggest loss. Lost by 1 to OU, by 4 to Nebraska that year, where Nebraska had Turner Gill and Irving Fryer and Rozier, and they were supposedly the best football team in the world. And they beat us by 4 points, and we had the ball down about the 25-yard line, and we were throwing the ball in the end zone as time ran out. And we had the lead at halftime. We just almost stole one from them. But that wound up being a phenomenal team, and really none of us knew how good we were going to be. But we wound up having a lot of guys that really played beyond their high school potential. Jimmy is known for being a great recruiter, and obviously Jimmy is a stud. I mean, his track record as a football coach is there. I mean, you can't question it. And he did a phenomenal job with the Herschel Walker trade in making the Dallas Cowboys a great program there in the early 90s. But that team in 83, really the coaches just got lucky on some deals. A teammate of mine named Matt Monger, that's an investment broker there for Merrill Lynch in Tulsa. Matt was a walk-on fullback from Miami, Oklahoma. And in fact, Jimmy tried to get Matt to quit and just focus on academics. He said his future wasn't in football. Well, Matt winds up moving to linebacker, was an all-conference linebacker, and played 7 or 8 years in the National Football League and went to the Super Bowl. So you got a walk-on fullback from Miami, Oklahoma named Matt Monger. You had Rusty Hilscher that nobody really wanted. You had Paul Blair that nobody really wanted. And so you had a bunch of guys that wound up, having good stints in the National Football League that we just showed up on their doorstep. So it turned out to be a surprisingly good team. But I played 3 years for Jimmy and then 2 for Pat, and have great memories from both. But they were as different as night and day, to be honest with you.
What memory do you have of the Barry Hanna play? I know that was celebrated a couple of weeks ago, the 40-year anniversary and all that. What memories do you have of that?
Well, that was a great game. That was one of the best games probably in bowl history. We'd gotten out to a good lead on South Carolina, and quite frankly, we thought we were going to play them in the Orange Bowl. And then they lost their last game of the year, and we lost our last game of the year, so we wound up being a top 10 matchup there in the Gator Bowl. And we got out to about a 2-touchdown lead, and the second half they caught us, and they had the lead on us late in the game, and we had to drive about 80 or 85 yards. I don't remember the exact difference, but literally with just a couple of minutes on the clock. And of course, we had a really good kicker, a guy named Larry Roach, good friend of mine, All-American kicker. So, if we could get it within field goal range, we felt like we could tie. I think we could tie the game. I think is what it was. And then, of course, that play, Barry caught the ball, and he wasn't exactly a gazelle running. Barry and I came in as freshmen together. But he wasn't known for being a powerhouse either. But let me tell you what, if you watch that play, he just had a will that he was not going to be denied. It was incredible. He had his helmet ripped off, and he just lowered his shoulder and took on every tackler. And it's amazing that he stayed in bounds. But that was one of the greatest games, and quite frankly, I think that was one of the greatest teams in OSU history. As good as the 2011 team was, as good as the team was that should have beat Notre Dame, that beat Notre Dame a couple of years ago, and those two teams should have won national championships. I think our 84 team should have as well. I mean, that was the year Brigham Young won the national title. Brigham Young had been in the Big 8. They had to finish 4th in our conference behind OU, Nebraska, us, and then they would have been there. But we had a great team there. Two guys that would be NFL Hall of Famers with Thurman Thomas and Leslie O'Neal. So that was a phenomenal team and a great game. And Barry's will to refuse to be denied really is one of the greatest plays, in my opinion, in college football history.
I thought we had the Seminoles there that next year, a repeat of Gator Bowl. I thought when we blocked the punt, I thought it was headed our way again.
Well, you know what? We were really kind of we showed up that game, sadly. That senior year in 85, we thought we were going to be really good, and we were. We were 8-1 at one point, and we had a sad defeat. We had a number of turnovers. We lost to Nebraska in Stillwater and a high-scoring game. But we were 8-1, and then we got upset. I played in Chicago, I played in Green Bay, I played in Buffalo, I played in some of the coldest temperatures in America. But I think the coldest game I've ever played in was at Iowa State that year in Ames, Iowa, in late November, early December. And it was just ridiculously cold. And it's amazing, Thurman wound up making a ton of money and a perennial Pro Bowler playing for Buffalo. But I remember that was probably one of his poorest games as well because it was just too cold. I mean, he dropped a touchdown pass at one point that would have won us the game, but it was just ridiculous. But we got upset by Iowa State. and we lost, I think, 15-10. And then, quite frankly, our season was over. At that point, everything that Leslie was a senior, I was a senior, John Washington was a senior. We had a great group of guys that were together. And after that loss, our goal of a Big 8 championship and possibly playing for a national championship had set sail. So after Iowa State, then we got beat by OU in the Ice Bowl. I don't know if you remember that game.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Which was
I was there.
Yeah, well, so was I.
I had me a bunch of trash bags and I was sitting on them. Probably, unfortunately, for both of us, we were there.
Well, we went from being 8-1 with aspirations of playing for a Big 8 national championship. And then we lose 2, so we go to 8-3. We wind up back in Jacksonville, which, as great as it was in '84, was like, it's like, it's like, well, this really wasn't what we were aiming for. And quite frankly, Bobby Bowden just lulled us into a bushwhack. I mean, he was talking about how outclassed they were, and they did something that we had never seen before. They threw the football. So we had this great defense, and of course, in the Big 8, everybody ran a wishbone or an I formation, and they came out and started throwing the ball through the air. It's like, what is this? Can they do that? Is that legal? And we wound up playing from behind most of the game, but we lost to an awfully good Florida State team that year.
Sure did. I'll tell you what, you got drafted in 1986 by the Bears. You had a nice NFL career there, obviously, but talking about I'm not sure you didn't have better backs to block for at Oklahoma State while you were there. I mean, Ernest Anderson, Sean Jones, Thurman Thomas. Talk about blocking for them.
What's interesting, Casey, is, of course, played with Ernest, played with Thurman. Sean Jones was a great back. We had a kid our age named Charles Crawford that may have had as much ability as any of them. But then, of course, I get drafted by Chicago, and I played with Walter Payton. I made a whistle stop through Denver and was teammates with Tony Dorsett. Go to Minnesota, was teammates with Herschel Walker. Played in the Japan Bowl with Bo Jackson. If there's a Hall of Fame of running backs, I've crossed paths with most of them as a lineman, but I'll tell you, there were none better than Thurman Thomas. And of course, when Thurman steps out the door, we had this kid from Kansas waiting in the wings, and Barry and I didn't play together. In fact, Barry and Mike came in '86, and that was the year we went out the door. I was a rookie at Chicago when Barry and Mike were true freshmen at Oklahoma State. But running back, that's one of the things that we're known for, and it's certainly well earned.
Absolutely. So Mike Gundy comes in. He becomes the starter in 1986. I can remember it like it was yesterday. During the Houston game, a game that was miserable to watch because the Cougars put a pop knot on her head that day. But it was exciting because we had this cocky young quarterback from Midwest City that everybody was really excited about, that we now know as Mike Gundy. So I'm sure you were connected from the second that Mike Gundy got on campus with him, still connected to the program, I'm sure. So talk about the program that he's created here.
Well, Mike's really one of the best. And of course, Boone Pickens will be known for making a significant impact on our football program. But Mike's the best thing that ever happened to Oklahoma State. He really is. Mike is a great coach. There are times where you get frustrated because Mike's Mike. He's going to do things his way. 90% of the time, that's the right decision. Every now and then, it's not. But Mike's loyalty to the university, and when you consider the prestige, I remember when he was his first year as a coach, and I don't bother people in Stillwater. I mean, I show up there every now and then. I love Oklahoma State, but my time in the sun is behind us. So I don't hang out and do all that stuff. But I remember when Gundy was the first year head coach, and he was off to a slow start. I called him to encourage him, and I was really amazed that he didn't. He was so appreciative and grateful for the call and the support, but he didn't need the encouragement. He said, Paul, if we want to just keep winning 7-8 games a year, we could have done that. But I want to take the next step. I want to make this a perennial powerhouse. So Mike had changed many things internally, and we had a couple of years that were rather rough there, if you remember. But my goodness, he was prophetic. Over the last 10 to 15 years, we're one of the 10 most winning teams in college football. And even though we haven't recruited at the level that a Georgia or an Alabama can, he has done a phenomenal job of finding talent and developing the talent. You know, we've had a certain carousel of assistant coaches, which is a good sign. Yes. You know, if you have a good assistant coach, you expect them to move on and become head coaches, which is what has happened much of the time. But Mike has managed to maintain incredible consistency at Oklahoma State. And those of us that grew up Oklahoma State fans, you know, we need to be thankful that this is now our new normal. You know, for the better part of 30 or 40 years, we'd have 4 or 5 good seasons, then we'd have 6 or 7 crummy ones. And, you know, as soon as we seemingly would turn the corner, we'd get slapped with probation, like what happened in 1988, which just almost killed us. But now we expect to be ranked. We expect to be in a good, significant bowl game. We expect to compete for the Big 12 title year in and year out. And really, it's Mike Gundy and his, you know, one, being a student of the game, and 2, being a loyal alum of Oklahoma State that's been able to get us to that next level. So if Mike happens to come across your program, thank you, Mike Gundy. You are a superstar when it comes to Oklahoma State football is concerned.
Outstanding. And he is a prodigy of Pat Jones. I don't think there's any doubt about that. You got to play for Pat. You mentioned some of the great years and then the probation years. He took Oklahoma State through all that. So for a guy who got to play with him, he's very connected with exactly what happened at OSU while he was the head coach. How should Oklahoma State fans and Paul Blair's mind view the tenure of Pat Jones at OSU?
Pat is one of my favorite coaches that I ever played for. You know, I played for Mike Ditka, and I played for Pat Jones. And 2 of the things that I really admired about both of those men, and I played for Jimmy. Let me tell you, Jimmy is a brilliant football mind. But as a player, Jimmy is very open, and he acknowledges the fact that he didn't treat his players the same. he had a different standard for different players. And it's like if you worked in an office somewhere and the boss treated certain employees differently than others, you know, you'd kind of go, well, that's not right. But that was Jimmy's style. He did that all the way through Dallas. It worked for him. He was a psychology major. That was just his way. But, you know, both Pat and Mike Ditka had a standard of having very few rules, but they applied to everybody. And, you know, if you were an All-American, which there was a couple of disciplinary incidents that we got into some trouble here and there. And you know what? The All-Americans had to run just as if you were on the scout team. I mean, the rules applied to everybody equally. And as a football player, especially some of the young guys that are coming up, you know, you really respect that in your coach. So, you know, Pat was a great football coach, obviously a defensive mind predominantly. We were very conservative. We wanted to make sure we had a solid defense out there and don't let the offense mess it up. But, you know, Pat was well, I've got so many great memories of Pat. I wish I could recount them for you, but I can't. Pat's the only guy I ever heard cuss that was funny. You know, he was kind of like a cross between Elmer Fudd and a sailor. But you know, he would say the darndest things, and you'd just sit there, and a moment after he said it, it would register what he just said, and it was just hilarious. But Pat's one of my favorite all-time people. I have great respect for Pat Jones, and it was an honor for me to play for him. And when Jimmy left and went to Miami, you know, I was part of that we were coming up as juniors. I was a returning starter. I mean, we were players that were really lobbying for Pat to get the job. And of course, he was option 1 anyway. But we were really heavy in the media and with the university wanting Pat to get the job. And we were so fortunate that he wound up being awarded the job. He deserved it.
Yeah, absolutely. And he did a really good job. Yeah. And he took Oklahoma State through some really dark times and really kind of led them in a situation to where they had the ability to get out of it. So I think sometimes Oklahoma State fans don't quite give him the credit that he deserves. So, hey, 1983, you're going to knock your damn eyes out that team, right? You mentioned 1985. Oklahoma State has a chance to win a national title, that kind of thing. 2011. We've had all these years.
Yep.
I'm 51. I can't tell you how many times. Hey, this is our year, right? Okay, so is this year our year, Paul Blair?
Well, you never can tell. I'm not. I try not to get too excited too early or discouraged. But, you think back, 3 years ago, we got off to a real rocky start. Mm-hmm. And we should have played for a national championship. Last year, we got off to a terrible start. Then finally discovered Ollie Gordon, finally figured out what pieces went where. And then if you watch, you watch that Notre Dame game from a few years ago. You watch the Arkansas game. I have really been impressed with how our coaching staff and the players alike, but we don't lose heart or give up when we get behind. And we have made some phenomenal halftime adjustments as coaches. So, I try not to get too excited too early, but I believe that Oklahoma State is the best team in the Big 12 Conference. I believe that we'll win the Big 12 this year. And just like, 2 or 3 years ago, 4 games into the season, I wouldn't have put OSU anywhere in the playoffs if I was predicting. But by the end of the year, I think they were the best team in college football. If not for, if we'd have had our starting tailback in that Baylor game in the Big 12 championship, then I think we win that walking away. And instead, we got stopped 6 inches short, and we didn't have the chance to play for a title. I think we're going to win the Big 12 this year. I have great respect for the coaches. I've heard remarkable things about some of the young talent on the field. The nice thing about it is having talent that's 2 and 3 deep. Of course, this quarterback we have right now, he's a great kid, 7-year kid, and just a true blue Oklahoma State guy. But I understand we've got some youngsters behind him that are phenomenally talented. So who knows? But I'm like you. I've got my Aggie optimism, and I proudly display it every year. So I'm pulling for a Big 12 championship, and we'll see where we go in the playoffs.
Absolutely. At least the motto is not, hey, wait till next year, like it used to be at Oklahoma State, right? Hey, Paul Blair, this has been just such an absolute honor. I can't tell you. Your name was part of my childhood as I was growing up in Stillwater, Oklahoma, as a diehard Oklahoma State fan. And so, man, this has been such an honor. Any final thoughts? And thank you so much for joining.
No, I have wonderful, wonderful memories of Oklahoma State. I'm proud to be a Cowboy and always will be. It was great to be back up in Stillwater 2 weeks ago. I'm arranging my schedule now where I'm starting to plan a little more in advance. I missed last year's 40-year anniversary with Jimmy and everybody coming back because I was leading a pastors conference in Pennsylvania that weekend. I just didn't plan ahead, but I'm coming back for the players reunion. It's great to catch up with the guys. In fact, Leslie was so excited when he was there 2 weeks ago. He's coming back for the players reunion. So we love Oklahoma State. We bleed orange, and we'll be seeing a lot more of me in Stillwater, Casey.
Oklahoma State fans, Paul Blair.